After a little while of talking with Victoria, I managed to get a few more details that might help me in the future. For starters, Victoria filled me in on a spell that would allow long-range communications between me and people that I was familiar with, basically establishing a psychic link between you and the person you wish to communicate with, in which distance itself doesn't really seem to matter, which will prove exceptionally helpful. I also managed to learn that Victoria herself is an S-class caster. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me at all that she's that high ranked, after seeing her little display in the Ring Eternia, which still does bring to question the nature of her powers individually, and that giant golden behemoth that she used to attack Pinstripe. What kind of spell was that? Since learning about magic, my knowledge of the subject has grown infinitely. I've basically covered all rudimentary information on the subject, and since then, the book has more or less turned into nothing but an endless pile of spells for basically everything you can imagine, which I'm not exactly going to complain about. According to Victoria, obtaining spells is usually an extremely high-cost transaction. There are simply so many possibilities for spells that could be made that the sheer number of them is mind-boggling. Typically, casters simply find a speciality, something that they prefer and fits their style and personality, and attempt to acquire spells in that category, which requires a lot of searching and resource in order to obtain them in trade and barter. But I simply have a never-ending stack of them. I'm definitely not going to complain about it, since I could probably attest some of my victory against Sylvester to simply knowing a lot of spells, a lot more than most people do. That's definitely an advantage for me, but it also brings to note the fact that if it's in the book, that means Pinstripe knows the spell as well, meaning this never-ending waterfall of spells that seems to just go on is actually part of Pinstripe's memory. He knows them all. Regardless of the amount of information I seem to gather and the knowledge of magic that I accumulate, Pinstripe's abilities still break all the rules. It doesn't seem to make any sense at all. The more I try to make sense of it, the more it just sounds nonsensical. None of it explains how he's able to do the things that he does. After I finished reading all the basic information and the knowledge about how magic works and functions and how to use it myself, I started trying to delve into possibilities for the way that Pinstripe operates, how his powers work, but the book gave me no information on it. I even tried assessing the functions that make it possible for Pinstripe to do those things. For example, being able to barter away specific abilities, talents, and assets that are essentially a part of a person, like their emotions, their age, their life expectancy, their overall magical power. Pinstripe is able to barter those things away as if it was nothing. And yet, no matter how far I look into the magical index, there are no spells that make that possible. In fact, the more I look at it, the more it seems that that kind of thing just doesn't seem possible at all. It's as if Pinstripe somehow possesses the ability to individually select aspects and things that a person has and take only what he wants without causing any extra damage or affecting anything else. As far as I know, there's nobody else who has that kind of ability. No list of spells in the magic index that would allow something like that to occur, and yet he does it anyways. And there isn't the foggiest explanation of how. Normally people are bound by their own magical abilities. They can't draw from other people or collect their energies or resources. and there's a finite limit to the amount of energy that any one person can have inside of them. Yet Pinstripe somehow seems to stow away unimaginable amounts of power. With as long as he's been dealing, the energy has to go somewhere, but there isn't the slightest clue as to where. How does he store it? How does he use it when he needs it? How does he obtain it? None of these questions seem to have any answer, at least as far as the magical index is concerned. But for the moment, I had other things to worry about. We needed to create magical products that our business could offer in order to show that we had an established company. In terms of getting that done, I talked to Eliza, and as expected, she gave me the answer that I already knew I was going to get, telling me that she couldn't make something from nothing. While she had been tinkering with a few things, none of them were too far outside of the bounds of regular magical items and tools that people might find functional, all of which are easily procurable in the magical world, stating that her primary limitation was that she simply didn't have magical assets to perform tests, studies, experiments, construct prototypes, and see what she could do with the materials that she needed. So basically, in order to get anywhere, we needed to first obtain materials that Eliza could use to run her experiments and try to come up with something. And on that note, we ended up having to go see Alice's father about it. We told him that we had found a way to work around the rule set so that we could get the protection without having to join up. But it was a process, and that in order to achieve the end goal, we needed magical supplies, things that Eliza could use to make products. He begrudgingly agreed to supply Eliza with all of the materials that he could, and he had collected a fair amount over the years, as well as his predecessing generations, his grandfather and father, and so he supplied us with a large amount of variable items and materials, metals infused with magical energy, magical crystals that could be used in a variety of different ways and possess different energies. As far as it appeared, there was a wide variety of magical materials to work with. Everything ranging from the fantastical, things that most people would generally be amazed at, to things that seemed mundane and ordinary. Dirt taken from specific locations at specific times, sand struck by lightning, or burned in a fire that claimed someone's life. It seemed that rather than magical materials simply being something that come from a fantastical place, or just containing items and materials that were simply infused with magical energy, lots of magical materials were things that came into creation under very specific sets of circumstances. For example, fur from a black cat, but not just any black cat. Fur from a black cat that was exactly 13 years old, dying on the night of its 13th birthday, under the light of a full moon, and that one apparently had a very high price tag. After hearing the explanation, the reason for why magical materials were so hard to obtain started to become clear. Having to reproduce sets of circumstances like that in order to obtain materials would be an incredibly lengthy process. Regardless of what you're talking about, learning about things like that might not be the primary agenda that I'm trying to reach, but understanding how magical materials come into being is definitely something I need to know. It will help me understand fair pricing and market values, production costs, exactly the type of things that you need to know if you're going to strike a bargain with somebody for magical materials. So at this point, it became clear in order to be effective we'd need to start splitting our assets. dividing our time in between the things that we needed in order to accomplish our goals.